So you said you competed in the vishing competition. So what got you into vishing and social engineering in general? Like, what made you get into that?
Yeah, so social engineering has always just been interesting. That's kind of one of the big introductions to pen testing, right? Is like the social engineering stuff and the calling and all that sort of stuff. Everyone's pretty familiar with email phishing, right? Because everyone gets spam emails and all that. It's always just been something interesting to me, really easy to digest as well. As far as the competition itself, I think it's really cool to enter, like capture the flags or challenges at DEFCON, and I felt like it just aligned with kind of my experience. Where as a consulting, I do social engineering engagements, maybe about three or so a year, dedicated to me, but also help out with other teams that are doing engagements and they want somebody else to come and help out with calls and those sort of nature. So I was pretty familiar with that. I had a good experience. So I felt it just be best aligned with me. And thankfully, they accepted my application. And it's honestly a lot harder than my real social engineering engagements. That's 2 months of prep, OSINT, a lot of planning. You don't have like days to do the calls. You have 22 minutes. So you really have to narrow down like who you're going to target because they need to answer. Because if nobody answers, then you get no points. So I thought it was really interesting. I thought I had good experience that might help me with it. And overall, it was a really fun experience.
There was a couple Darknet Diary episodes that had highlighted the competition, and it sounded like those episodes are some of the better episodes, to be honest with you. It does sound fun, and I'd love to see that in person. You mentioned your social engineering engagements for your work. So how often are you doing social engineering engagements as a consultant right now? I'm assuming do you do like network testing and web app testing too, or
I started as a network pen tester, and then the past year I switched over to the red team. So whenever I was network pen testing, social engineering wasn't as common. So I would maybe do about two a year, maybe, and that'd be phishing and emails, and that was it. That was pretty much it, I believe. It was a lot more limited on what I was able to do because a lot of times in the network pen testing, the client would give us the informations, the targets to target, like the people that we would have to call. And now that I've switched over to the red teaming stuff, it's, if I recall, it's pretty much paired with every engagement we do since the whole thing is getting into their network. So if I recall correctly, we do have social engineering on each red team. So I've maybe done about four or five in the past year for those. And that's the whole thing. So that would be the text message phishing, phone calls, the phishing, and then the emails. And we also get more freedom. So we get to pick the targets. We get to do more OSINT. That's pretty much the big thing. We get to do more OSINT and red teaming and create more creative scenarios as well. So that's about how often I do it.
if someone wanted to get into social engineering, so someone like me, like I'm a pen tester, but I've never been on a social engineering engagement, but it's interesting to me. Where would I go to like learn how to do social engineering? Like what are some resources you can use to bolster your social engineering skills?
Yeah, it is. That is a good question because, there's not a certificate that you can like study for and that sort of stuff, or you can't really like practice it in a home lab. So it is harder in that way to practice it. So I'd probably say, as far as getting an idea of how it is, those Darknet Diaries would be a great resource. Hearing stories from people who have done it. I'm sure there's some talks on YouTube. Jason Street, I know, has a lot of videos on YouTube that he's posted from talks describing how he's done it. So I think getting familiar, which is kind of the process from those stories, is a good starting point. There's also the infrastructure part of it. So setting up, the fake websites that will capture stuff. The most common one right now is EvoGenX. There's also device code phishing, like Graph Runner, that got released not too long ago. I think by Black Hills is the team that released that. So there's that part, understanding the infrastructure. That is something that people can practice by themselves, is building that up. Not sending that to people, phishing links, but like yourself going through the motions and seeing and trying to get it to work and all that. And then there's the whole performing the social engineering part of it, which is a lot harder because, like I said, the only way to practice is to do it, and the way to do it legally is through contracts and through having a job. A lot of the common skills that you need are just people skills. So there's just becoming more familiar talking with people that you haven't met, like networking at conferences, those small conversations that you have are small conversations that you have whenever you're social engineering. And everyone kind of has their own way of doing it. And for me, I found the best way is kind of build a quick rapport, like the small talk sort of stuff, and try to get their trust a little bit. And that's just, people skills. And then there's also another part of that, if you want to dig a little deeper, which is kind of how you word everything. And the closest thing that I could find to that is like studying those salespeople, those like really salespeople videos where it's like, you got to hook the customer this way. But what you get from that is kind of like how you need to have a scenario to where the target needs your help with some urgency and to where they don't hang up. So kind of like engaging them in the call. So there's kind of a lot of different resources scattered around, not like a clear way, unfortunately, but hopefully something in there will help somebody out.
Yeah, you mentioned there's no certifications for social engineering. I wonder if so I feel like someone's gonna come out with one eventually. I mean, I feel like it can be done if someone really tried it. Maybe I don't know, maybe not, but that'd be interesting to see, the world's first social engineering certification.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Definitely, there's definitely a need for something like that.
So is it essential for a network pen tester or a web app pen tester to eventually learn how to do social engineering? Do you think it's a must-have skill, or do you think learning social engineering would take away from their primary job too much?
That is a good question. It would heavily rely on kind of where they're working at. I know for web app pen testing, it's not too common to do social engineering. It's usually, at least from what I've seen, paired with like network pen testing. I think for web app, if somebody's going to focus on that, they probably don't have to focus too much on social engineering. For network, since the big thing is getting access to their internal network, and social engineering's the best way to do that, I would recommend to work on those skills as well. And it's kind of just one of the things for, being a pen tester, kind of have to poke at everything or be familiar with different stuff. But if that's not, something, some people are just uncomfortable doing social engineering. It does get nervous calling people. So you can definitely be a great network pen tester without doing social engineering. Just, one of the parts to it that people can study if they want to.
And then to further that question, so if someone want to go into red teaming, do you think every red teamer has to be at least somewhat familiar with social engineering, or do you think like a good network pen tester can really just focus on like network red teaming and not worry about the social engineering aspect of it too much?
I think based now how a lot of companies have really good network defenses, I think if you want to be a really good red teamer, I'm not a really good red teamer. I'm definitely not one of the best, so I'm not coming from, great red team experience. To be on the path of being a really good red teamer, you will need social engineering skills. And that's just to say again, the networking side of companies is really strong right now. So it's going to be really hard to find network vulnerabilities where you could get a remote code execution or get into their internal network, maybe through password spraying, but still, that's another layer. So having that skill set of social engineering whenever you go into red team engagements is a huge plus. At least that's what's worked for me to get internal access on my red team engagement. It's always been through social engineering. So I highly recommend it. And again, if anything, at least learn the infrastructure side. Maybe get away with smishing and email filters where you don't have to do the phone calls, but at least something that you'll need to be better.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's pretty good advice, especially for people who want to get into red teaming. Maybe they're a pen tester and they're trying to level up to be a red teamer. So, can you tell me like your most interesting social engineering story? Like, if you had to pick the best moment you ever had in social engineering, can you tell me about that at all?
Yeah, I could tell about it, and there's a clear, distinct one because I've only been on one physical social engineering engagement, and that one's definitely been the most memorable ones. The phone calls, they've all kind of been similar as far as like how they happened, so they all kind of like just blend in with my memory now. But for the physical one, that one's definitely one that I remember, and that one was for a client that had a couple of office floors in a skyscraper. So we try to get access to their office area within those levels. And the skyscraper, they have multiple companies at different levels, at the different floors. So they told us the floors that they owned. I went with one of my coworkers. He was a little bit more experienced, so he kind of took the lead on that. And so the first day or so, we're in the lobby, kind of just understanding how it all works, seeing which elevators go to certain floors, kind of seeing the traffic. Obviously, the best times are going to be in the morning and then returning from lunch. It wasn't too crazy, nothing like I didn't have any cool hacker tools or anything like that, but it was pretty much just the good old tailgating. So one of the elevators opened. It was on the third day, so I finally got the nerves to do it. It was on the third day. I went up to the elevator. I followed maybe about 4 or 5 people. I followed them in, and they went. They picked the floor. I saw the number of highlights. I was like, perfect. That's the floor that I need to go to. I'll just ride it up there with them. To get to the floor, this is where I made the mistake. So I followed them. So I was in the front. So once the door opened, I had to step out first, but I have a badge that worked. So I kind of had to linger around a little bit. And that's whenever the four other people were like, "Can I help you? What are you doing here?" So I was like, "Oh snap! Like I'm busted. There's nothing I can do." So I was like, "Oh yeah, sorry, I'm on the wrong floor." And they're like, "Okay." And then they pressed the button. They called the elevator for me to go back down. So I was like, "Oh dang, I failed." So I went back in the elevator. I pressed the next floor. I was like, maybe I'll get lucky. So I pressed the next floor that the company is in. I dropped down to the floor. The elevator door opens. There's four elevators, two across from each other. So my elevator door opens. Across from me, the other elevator door opens, and then somebody's there. So we make eye contact. I give him a head nod. He was in a rush apparently, so like he bolted out the elevator door. He scans his bed, opens the door wide open. So I follow him in. There's like a receptionist and some other doors. So I saw him go to another door, still urgently racing over there. And so I followed him in, and he opened the door really wide open. So I just walked in, and then I was in. I was like, wow, that was a lot easier than I thought. I was been nervous for the past few days. Went into a conference room because conference rooms usually have network ports that are open. People just come in and plug in their computers. So I went into a conference room, found the network port, plugged it into my laptop. Like I got an IP address to show that I was in the domain. Did a little NS lookup, and it was clearly in the domain. So got the objectives, but it's definitely very nerve-wracking. My first and only physical pen test, so definitely a good memory.
That sounds like a real thrill. So let's learn here, everybody. The If you're tailgating an elevator, go in the back of the elevator and let
Definitely.
everybody else leave the elevator first. After you, good sir. No, I
Yeah.
insist.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh yeah, no, I'm right here, but just go in first. I'm being a gentleman. Yeah, definitely that was a big mistake.